everybody, it's Jen from Los Gatos Library, and I'm really happy you're here today. We're going to start a new program, a new series, a new project, combining art and science, a little bit of exercise, some creativity, and some community building. We are going to make a traveling nature journal. So we've all been home a lot this spring, right? We've missed field trips, we missed spring break, we're missing the first summer vacation weeks, and that's a bummer. But I have definitely been noticing the things that have been happening in my own front yard, in my own neighborhood, in our local parks. As I've been talking with our library friends who've been at home as well, as we sit in Zoom meetings, we notice that one of the things that keeps coming up is what's happening at our bird feeders, what's blooming in our garden, and which of our neighbors has really cool plants growing. Even though we aren't together to motivate each other, we are going to do a traveling nature journal. We're going to record our stories, we're going to put them in a notebook, and we're going to send it from person to person so that we're getting some of these awesome observations recorded. So a couple of things you should know about this program, this series, before we get started. This is an all ages program. If you can get outside and observe the world and hold a pencil, you're in. We want you to participate with us. You can work alone or you can work in a group. If you want to follow our prompts and do your own nature journal and hang on to it and keep it, that's totally fine. If you want to do a prompt and then send it to a friend and point them toward the links, that's also excellent. I think this would be an awesome project for you to work on with your family. So one person in your family could start the project and then pass the journal on to someone else. Whatever works for you, that's what you should do. The other thing you should know is that absolutely nothing specific is required for this project. We want you to use what supplies you have lying around your house, and we want you to use whatever skills you already have. You don't need to be an artist, you don't need to be a professional scientist, you don't need to have a lot of tools. Whatever you've already got is exactly what you need. The last thing that you need to know about this project is that it's not going to be a step-by-step tutorial. We've done some art projects like that in the past where we start with a very specific set of supplies and we come up with a very specific end product and we walk you through it step by step. That's not what this is going to be. This is going to be a set of ideas and hopefully some inspiration. Your end product is going to be totally different than our end product, and that's what makes it awesome and exciting. We can't wait to see what you create. So let me show you what we're going to do today, our first entry in the Los Gatos Library Shared Nature Journal. So I happen to have a notebook, a watercolor paper notebook around my house. I had a set of 2 of these. I was using one. I was not using the other. So this is the notebook that we are going to use. Any paper is going to be 100% okay. If you have some notebook paper, a binder, that's going to be great. Printer paper, I think it could be really great to use just sheets of printer paper and hold them together with a binder clip and bind them when you're all done. But whatever you have, that's what you should use. I've started ours off with a title page. I've decided to call it Our Nature Stories. And then I've written a letter to the folks that I'm going to send it to so that they know what it is they've received in the mail. So let me tell you what I've written here. Dear friends, did you ever imagine we would spend so much of 2020 indoors, looking out windows or taking walks in our own neighborhoods? I have enjoyed hearing all about your close-to-home adventures. We've become great nature explorers. I thought we should record our stories somewhere about the things we've noticed in the natural world. Here's the plan so far. When you get the notebook, get outside, observe, wonder, ask questions, and write it all down. Be curious. Use the supplies you have around the house and record your nature stories. Then send the notebook on. You are awesome. Love, Jen. It's important to tell your friends that they're awesome because they want to hear that from you. This is our title page. It's pretty straightforward. I'm hoping that each person that gets it will add a little illustration to this front page. I would love to see this front page kind of grow and change as the journal goes from person to person. So I decided that the first story in our nature journal was going to be based on a particular color. When you think about going outside, or when you think about your favorite park or your front yard or your favorite spot in nature, and you imagine the colors, you probably think about greens and browns and maybe the blue of the sky. I was looking out my window and I noticed we have a nice Japanese maple tree in our front yard that's got all sorts of cool red leaves on it. And we have a bird feeder, and one of our most frequent visitors is a house finch who's got bright red feathers. So as I saw this red feathered house finch sitting on our Japanese maple waiting for his turn at the feeder, I was surprised at how many red things caught my attention in our front yard. So I went outside and I spent about 10 or 15 minutes collecting things in my yard that were red, and I found a whole bunch of them. So our first story is going to be about the color red in my front yard. And I've decided that the first person I'm going to send this journal to is Librarian Grace. Because if you know Librarian Grace, I bet you have been to some of her art classes. She's a fantastic artist, and I think she will do a great job noticing something about nature and putting it in our journal. So I'm going to write to Grace about my observations about the color red in my front yard. So that's what our second page is. I've written Grace a letter. And then at the end, I've left her a challenge for her entry. Now, she can choose to do this challenge, or she can choose to make up her own challenge. Either way, that's fine. She doesn't have to follow my suggestion, but I left her a starting point, because sometimes when you're journaling, if you don't have a starting point, it can be tricky to know where to start. And let me show you some of the red things that I found in my yard that I'm going to put in my journal. I'm going to include most of them straight in the book. I'm going to glue them down, and I'm going to leave Grace some notes that I made while I was collecting them. As I'm out in the world, I use 3 prompts that I learned from John Muir-Laws. I'm going to link up some information about his awesome nature journaling classes and prompts that are available on the web for free. But he encourages you to use 3 questions or 3 prompts. I notice, I wonder, and it reminds me of. So as I write to Grace about these things, I'm going to be using those 3 prompts. I noticed, I wondered, it reminded me of. I have pretty straightforward supplies here. I have Sharpie, I have a pencil, I actually have a couple different kinds of Sharpies. I have one red pen that I used a little bit in my note to Grace. I have just a few colored pencils because I don't plan on doing a ton of drawing. I have some rolling adhesive, but you could definitely use tape or school glue or whatever you have. That's going to be great. And then I have some tape here. I have a couple different kinds of red washi tape. I have a bunch of scrapbooking supplies at my house, so that's one thing I'm going to try to use. I have some red scrapbooking paper that I'm going to use for decorations, and I have a card that says a story about, and I have a plan for this as well. So I'm gonna turn the camera off, and then we'll come back and I'll walk you through what I did. One of the things I noticed when I was collecting things in my yard was just how many different shades of red there were, and it made me wonder about why there are so many different reds, and if different creatures liked different shades of red better, or if it had to do with where things were growing in the yard. So I had a lot of questions about that. So that's one of the things I'm thinking about as I'm putting together this story. So on my card here that says a story about, I've just represented that by listing a bunch of different color names for red. And then I've got carmine, scarlet, crimson, vermilion, ruby, maroon, chili pepper, mahogany, burgundy, cherry, hibiscus, cranberry, rose, and brick. And there were lots of other options, but those were the ones that fit in my box. You could make something like this out of paper, or find a card that you have around the house and let that inspire you. And you can see I've made a mess, which is fantastic. Both artists and scientists and creators and explorers need to kind of revel in mess. So that's what we've got going on. The first thing I did was to just make a border around the outside. I had some different colors of red paper. This is scrapbooking paper, but of course any kind of red paper would work, or you could draw something like this if you were interested in it. But again, I'm exploring that idea of the different shades of red and how many different kinds of red there were in the yard. So I tore little strips of these off. They were strips that were about this size, and I glued them around the edges, and you can see they're rough. They are far from perfect. They're torn, they're glued down in a sloppy fashion, but it just kind of brings some color to the edges of the paper. I went out and I collected all of these things last night, and I left them between some pieces of paper in a heavy book. So all of these things started at least a little bit flat, with the exception of the berries. I didn't flatten the berries because, well, you know why. So let me walk you through some of the different things that I've glued down and written about, and I'll tell you a little bit about the different things I used to adhere stuff. So let's start with this. I have a photo over here of our bird feeder, and I trimmed it just to make the shape more interesting. And I said, I wrote, I wonder why the hummingbirds are only so-so on the food in the feeder. Are there too many other things for them to eat? And then over here with the maple leaves, I used a little bit of scrapbook rolling adhesive. I just put that down on the paper and I pressed the leaf onto it. The stems are held with a little bit of washi tape. I'm sure you could use any combination of glue stick or tape that you happen to have. I used the same system over here for the geraniums. I put a little bit of glue on the paper. I pressed the geraniums down, and I used a little bit of washi on the stems. For the geraniums, when I see geraniums, I said they remind me of visiting my grandma's house. When I was a little girl, my job was to water the geraniums, and that's something I really remember about being there in the summer, and that really reminds me, the smell of geraniums reminds me of being at my grandma's house in the summer. So, and when I put these in the book today, I can still smell the geranium smell of them. So I put a little note for Grace or for whoever comes along later, can you still smell them? The smell will probably fade, I'm assuming, who knows? Coming over to the other side here, I started with the photo of the finches. I didn't take this photo. I found it on the web. It's from the Indiana Audubon Society, and I printed it. Thank you, Indiana Audubon Society. I made a note that says, I notice we have 2 or 3 pairs of finches that visit the feeders. I notice they visit in male-female pairs. I wonder if they have a nest nearby. We call them Mr. and Mrs. Finch-Fletchy, after Justin Finch-Fletchy in the second Harry Potter book. We name the birds that visit our feeder. Then I tackled the berry. So we have some berries in our backyard that are actually coming over from our neighbor's yard. And these are blackberries, but at the moment they're red. I've pulled a couple of the berries off, and I'll show you why in a minute. So each berry is a different shade of red, kind of a purpley red, or they're green on the back. So even though I'm not an artist, I felt like I could tackle drawing a berry. It's just a bunch of circles with some green leaves on the top. So I colored in each of the circles with a different shade of red to kind of represent that. And I put a few green ones in. And then I took one of these little berry circles and I smushed it into my book. I tried it on a piece of scratch paper first. I smushed it into my book to get a little bit of the color of the juice coming from the berry. That was super fun. So I said the blackberries in the yard are mostly red now. I labeled it that's juice from the berry. I wondered why different bits of berries change colors at different times. Do some parts get more sun? I'm not sure. Sue, you notice I'm not at all concerned about answering my questions. I'm just noticing and I'm asking questions and I'm recording them. Maybe sometime I'll find an answer to my questions. Maybe I'll get a book from the library or do some internet research. Maybe I'll observe something in the yard that leads me to make a guess to the answer to these questions. It doesn't really matter. It's more about the noticing and the asking the questions and the writing it down. So next I have a rose petal from my neighbor's house next door. And as I glued it down, what I really noticed about it was that the inside, the point of the rose petal is a much different color than the outside edge of the rose petal. And so I took my colored pencils and I made a little gradient sketch here. I was just kind of capturing the idea that it's lighter on the inside and darker towards the edge of the petal. And I said, I notice the color gets darker towards the edge of the petal. I wonder if that happens as the rose grows or if it's like that from the moment the rose blooms. And also I noticed there's no smell on the rose petal like there is on the geranium. So I'm okay with the idea that maybe in a week or a month, the things that I've taped in here may not be in as good a shape. So the next person who gets the journal may have to say, I'm pulling this geranium out, it's just falling apart, or this red valerian that I'm about to write about may just totally disintegrate. That's okay, we'll see what happens. Okay, I think I'm gonna stop there. I'm out of space on this page, almost, and I think that's a good sign that I'm probably gonna stop. So, I think I had left you with this piece of, it's a pink flower, but it's called red valerian. And when I was collecting, I decided that was close enough to make it into my collection. This is not glued down at all. It's just got a couple pieces of tape. And this is one of the things I'm most worried about falling apart in the book, but that's okay. So I've said this pink flower is called red valerian. So I collected it. It's everywhere in our neighborhood. So I wonder how the seeds spread. How does it make new plants? So I also made a note that this is one small piece of a much bigger plant. It's usually at least 2 to 3 feet tall, and it's got lots of clusters of small pink flowers. So this little bit that I've put in here doesn't really represent the whole plant. So I made some notes about what else happens with it. Okay, and then this little piece here is a flower that hasn't bloomed yet, and I have no idea what the plant is. So you don't have to know what it is you're looking at to wonder about it or to have questions or to add it to your collection. So I said, I have no idea what this plant is. I noticed that it only blooms every few years, and I don't remember if the flowers are red or if it's just the outside of this blossom case. The other thing I noted about this flower is that it grows on really tall stalks above the plant. And I used the scientific description of leaves are brown and green and pokey. Yeah, so that's what I noticed about that plant. Okay, so coming over here, I wrote about the berries, the strawberries that I picked in my yard. And I cut one in half and made a press of the juice like I did with the blackberry. With the strawberry, you slice it lengthwise, you get a nice heart shape. That's just fun. And again, I decided I had the art skills necessary to draw a strawberry. And I said, I noticed that the strawberries are whole and not eaten by slugs. Our strawberries have been attacked by slugs and snails recently, and somebody suggested that coffee grounds in the soil would help. So I had been putting coffee grounds in them. So it looks like it's working. I'm going to keep noticing that and see if they continue to be whole and delicious strawberries. And so I made a note here, caffeinated strawberries, ? You don't always have to be serious in your nature journal. Make some caffeinated strawberries. I also noticed that even in one strawberry, there are several shades of red. And so when I got to the strawberry and I was drawing it and I was using a couple different colors of red pencil just to kind of try and catch that, it really, it stood out for me just like how many different kinds of red there are out in my yard. And even in one single berry, there's such a wide variety of shades, and it just seemed cool to me. So I made a note of that. Even one strawberry has several shades of red. All right, let's take a look here at this one blossom from a kangaroo paw plant. The fuzzy leaves, the texture on these, they're soft and fuzzy. And I made a note that it reminds me of like a lamb's ear plant, if you know what those feel like. They're soft and fuzzy. And I asked the question, what does that do for the plant? Why fuzzy? I wonder. And then I also made a note that I noticed the hummingbirds love these, and maybe that's why they're avoiding my feeder. All right, so then I think the only thing we haven't talked about in the book are these last two little, these are little pieces of the succulent plant that we have right by our front door. And I don't know if you can see, this one is red, but this one is green and it has red spots kind of on there. See how close we can get there. And I wrote, even the succulent by the front door have red leaves. I wonder if that means that these leaves are dying like trees in the fall, or can a succulent leaf have a nice red healthy leaf? And as I was thinking of that and noticing the red leaves from the maple tree, I had just this kind of really big question. How do trees with red leaves make food? I thought that chlorophyll meant that leaves were green. And obviously there's something I'm missing there, because the Japanese maple is thriving and it has bright red leaves. So that's a thing. I made a big note of it. I circled it with my pen here. I made a nice cloud around it. That I'm going to have to look up. That I feel like there's a really obvious answer and that I probably should know it. And I'm gonna find the answer to that question. All right, so the last thing I did was I just went through with my red pen and I underlined the places where I had asked those 3 questions that we talked about at the beginning, or the 3 prompts. I wonder, I notice, and it reminds me of. And again, like I said, I'm not gonna really go to any great lengths to answer these questions. I'm gonna trust that as I continue exploring, the answers might come, or I might find a book one day that answers a question I've asked here. For now, I am going to wrap up this journal. I'm going to close it up. I'm going to wish it well, and I'm going to send it on to Grace. I can't wait to see what she does with it and other friends in the library. I think it's going to be a great, thick, chunky piece of work when it's done, and I'm really excited. So the last thing I want to tell you about before we go, I do have here a stack of books about nature journaling and about nature. Many of these books are available on Hoopla or in our library catalog, and I'm sure there are others. So I'm going to put together a resource sheet and link it here in the description so that you can check some of these out if you have an interest in reading in detail about nature journaling. And yeah, I think you will enjoy them. All right, thanks for joining us today. I hope that you'll stick with us through this series. In the description below, we've told you how you can share photos of your nature journaling with us. We absolutely cannot wait to see what you've done, and we hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.